The email notification pinged on my screen at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that would change everything. You have been removed from senior developer hiring panel effective immediately. No explanation. No courtesy call. Just a cold, corporate deletion of my authority. I stared at the message, my half-empty coffee mug growing cold beside a stack of candidate resumes I'd been meticulously reviewing. The weight of professional humiliation settled over me like a suffocating blanket, each word of that terse message echoing in my mind. Around me, the familiar sounds of the engineering floor continued, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the low hum of air conditioning, but everything felt muted, distant, like I was underwater. I'm Alice Wilson, Senior Engineering Manager at Apex Innovations, and I've been running hiring panels for 7 years. 7 years of meticulous candidate evaluation, comprehensive background checks, and building teams that actually work together cohesively. My office walls were lined with commendation letters from successful hires, team photos from company retreats, and a whiteboard covered in current project timelines. But apparently, that methodical approach wasn't fast enough for our new VP of Engineering, Nathan Rodriguez, who'd swooped in 6 months ago with his Stanford MBA, his collection of motivational business books, and his revolutionary ideas about streamlined processes. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd built my reputation on careful decision-making, the kind that prevented disasters rather than creating them. My hiring success rate was 96%, meaning only 4 out of every 100 hires had required termination or disciplinary action. I kept detailed files on every candidate, cross-referenced their skills with team dynamics, and conducted thorough reference checks that went beyond the standard "would you hire this person again?" My process took time, yes, but it worked. Or at least, it had worked until Nathan decided that speed was more valuable than accuracy. "We need faster decisions, Alice," he'd said during our last one-on-one, his fingers drumming impatiently on his mahogany desk. "The market won't wait for your thoroughness." The way he said thoroughness made it sound like a character flaw. Like caring about who we hire was somehow antiquated. Our competitors are snatching up talent while we're still conducting third interviews and waiting for background checks. We need to be more agile, more decisive. I'd tried to explain my reasoning, pulling up statistics about turnover rates and team productivity, but Nathan had already made up his mind. He'd shown me charts about time-to-hire metrics from other tech companies, benchmarks that made our 2-week average look glacial. "Look at TechFlow Industries," he'd said, pointing to a graph with triumphant satisfaction. "They're hiring senior developers in 3 days. 3 days, Alice. We're taking 2 weeks. And what's their retention rate?" I'd asked, genuinely curious about the long-term outcomes. Nathan had paused, his finger hovering over his tablet. That's not the point. The point is speed. The point is not losing good candidates to indecision." I remember walking back to my office that day, my hands trembling slightly as I gathered my hiring documentation. 23 successful hires. 0 disciplinary issues. 3 promotions to leadership roles. But none of that mattered anymore. Speed was the new religion, and I was apparently a heretic. The walk from Nathan's corner office to mine felt like a funeral procession. I passed the cubicles of developers I'd hired over the years, Jennifer, who'd joined us straight from college and was now leading our mobile development team, Thomas, who'd been laid off from his previous company and found new purpose in our AI initiatives, Sophia, who'd relocated from Portland specifically for our culture and flexible work arrangements. Each of them represented hours of careful evaluation, multiple interviews, and intuitive decision-making that couldn't be reduced to a simple algorithm or accelerated timeline. The next morning, I watched from my corner office window as Nathan assembled his new rapid response hiring team in the glass-walled conference room. Jake Morrison from HR, barely 2 years out of college but blessed with the ability to make quick decisions and an infectious enthusiasm for disruption. Emma Thompson from finance, who could crunch numbers faster than she could spell cultural fit and had memorized every salary band in the company. And leading the charge, Nathan himself, armed with his philosophy that good enough was the enemy of good enough right now, pacing back and forth like a general preparing for battle. I should have felt relieved. No more late nights reviewing portfolios under the harsh fluorescent lights of my office. No more stress-induced headaches from making the wrong choice. No more careful scrutiny of references and employment gaps. But instead, I felt hollow, like a master craftsman watching assembly line machines replace decades of learned skill and intuition. The first candidate interview happened that Thursday. I heard the laughter echoing from the conference room, the kind of easy camaraderie that happens when people aren't asking hard questions about technical depth or long-term career goals. 45 minutes later, they emerged, Nathan's face glowing with the satisfaction of efficiency, his sleeves rolled up like he'd just completed a marathon. Jake was scribbling notes on his tablet, Emma was already pulling up salary comparisons, and they were all smiling with the confidence of people who just solved a complex problem in record time. I couldn't help but compare it to my own interview process. I typically spent 2 hours with each candidate, sometimes more. The first hour was technical assessment, not just coding problems, but architectural thinking, debugging scenarios, and discussions about scalability. The second hour was cultural fit, understanding their communication style, their approach to collaboration, their career aspirations. I'd follow up with their references, not just the ones they provided, but sometimes reaching out to mutual connections in the industry. It was exhaustive, but it was also thorough. Nathan's team was conducting what they called focused interviews, 30 minutes of rapid-fire questions designed to assess both technical skills and cultural fit simultaneously. They had a rubric, a checklist, and a scoring system that reduced complex human evaluation to numerical ratings. It was impressive in its efficiency, terrifying in its simplicity. "See how easy that was," he announced to the team. "No overthinking, no analysis paralysis. Just solid instincts and quick action." I buried myself in my current projects, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in my stomach. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially when you've spent 7 years perfecting a process. I found myself glancing at the hiring pipeline dashboard, watching as candidates moved through the process at lightning speed. 3 days from application to offer. It was impressive, I had to admit, like watching a Formula One race after years of Sunday drives. Maybe Nathan was right. Maybe I had been overthinking everything, paralyzed by perfectionism in a world that rewarded rapid execution. The first hire from the new process was announced the following Monday. Michael Brooks, senior developer, starting salary $125,000, 2 years of experience at a fintech startup. The announcement came with the usual fanfare, a company-wide email, a brief bio, and a photo of him shaking hands with Nathan. He looked professional enough, clean-shaven, confident smile, the kind of eager enthusiasm that made executives believe they'd found a rising star. I did what I always did with new hires, I looked him up on LinkedIn. His profile was polished, his recommendations glowing, his experience seemingly solid. But something nagged at me. There was a gap in his employment history, a 6-month period between his previous job and the one before that. In my old process, I would have asked about that gap, pressed for details, maybe even reached out to someone at his previous company for an informal reference. But this wasn't my hire anymore. This was Nathan's victory, and I was just a spectator. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of watching the new system work with mechanical precision, candidates flowing through interviews like products on an assembly line. 2 weeks of second-guessing my own methods, wondering if my careful approach had been holding back talented people who needed quick decisions. 2 weeks of wondering if I'd been holding the company back with my old-fashioned approach to hiring, clinging to outdated processes in a rapidly evolving tech landscape. During those 2 weeks, I watched Michael Brooks integrate into the team. He was charming, technically competent, and seemed to fit in well with the other developers. He asked good questions during stand-up meetings, contributed meaningfully to code reviews, and even volunteered to help with some of the more challenging debugging sessions. If anything, he seemed like validation of Nathan's approach, proof that quick decisions could yield excellent results. But there were small things. The way he avoided certain security protocols, claiming they slowed down his development process. The questions he asked about our client database structure, which seemed more curiosity than necessity. The fact that he often stayed late, working on projects that weren't immediately visible to the rest of the team. In my old role, I might have flagged these behaviors for further investigation. Now, I filed them away as personality quirks, the kind of minor concerns that seemed petty in the face of his obvious competence. Then came that Friday morning. I was reviewing quarterly performance metrics when my office door exploded open with such force that it rattled the framed certificates on my wall. Nathan Rodriguez stood in the doorway, his face flushed crimson, his usually perfect hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. His normally crisp white shirt was wrinkled, his tie askew, and his eyes were wild, darting around my office like a cornered animal searching for escape routes. "Alice," he screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "Why did we hire someone flagged for fraud? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I looked up from my laptop, my expression carefully neutral despite the chaos radiating from him. The irony of the moment wasn't lost on me. Nathan bursting into my office, demanding answers about a hiring decision I'd been systematically excluded from. "I'm sorry, Nathan," I said slowly, setting down my coffee cup. "But I wasn't involved in any recent hiring decisions. Remember? You removed me from the panel." His face went from red to pale in seconds, like someone had drained the blood from his veins. "The new senior developer, Michael Brooks. He just tried to access our client database after hours. Security flagged him immediately when he started downloading files. When they ran a deeper background check." He paused, swallowing hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "He's been involved in 3 separate fraud investigations. 2 convictions. Identity theft, credit card fraud, corporate espionage." I felt a cold satisfaction spreading through my chest, but I kept my voice level. "That's unfortunate. What does your rapid response team say about it?" "They didn't know," he shouted, then immediately lowered his voice, glancing nervously at the open door. "The background check company we used only goes back 3 years. Brooks' convictions were from 5 years ago." The employment gap I saw on his LinkedIn profile suddenly made perfect sense. He'd been serving time. I nodded slowly, pulling up my own files. "I see. And what background check company do you normally use?" "Secure Screen Solutions. They're fast, efficient, and cost-effective. 48-hour turnaround, basic criminal and credit checks." "Ah." I opened my filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder labeled Vendor Comparisons. "I use Comprehensive Check Incorporated. They take longer, usually 7 to 10 business days, but they go back 10 years and cross-reference multiple databases. They check federal, state, and local court records. They verify employment history through direct contact with previous employers. They even run social media screenings and professional license verifications. More expensive, but..." I shrugged, allowing myself a small smile. "Thorough." Nathan's hands were shaking now, trembling as he gripped the doorframe for support. "He's already had access to our systems for a week. Our client data, our proprietary algorithms, our financial projections, everything. Legal says we could be looking at lawsuits, regulatory violations, potential criminal charges if he's stolen anything. The board is demanding answers. Our insurance company is threatening to drop us." The magnitude of the situation was finally sinking in. This wasn't just a hiring mistake, it was a potential catastrophe that could destroy everything we'd built at Apex Innovations. Our client base included several Fortune 500 companies who trusted us with their most sensitive data. A single breach could result in millions in damages, not to mention the irreparable harm to our reputation. "What exactly did he access?" I asked, my manager instincts kicking in despite the circumstances. Nathan slumped into the chair across from my desk, his corporate confidence completely shattered. "Everything. He had senior developer privileges, which means access to our entire codebase, client databases, financial records, strategic planning documents. Security found evidence that he'd been systematically copying files to an external drive every night for the past week. The forensics team is still analyzing the extent of the breach." I felt my stomach drop. Senior developer privileges were something I'd always been careful about, typically granted only after a 6-month probationary period. But Nathan's accelerated process had apparently fast-tracked Michael Brooks through standard security protocols as well. The irony was almost too perfect. I'd spent 7 years building a reputation for careful, methodical hiring. 7 years of being told I was too slow, too cautious, too old-fashioned. And now, in the space of 2 weeks, Nathan's revolutionary approach had potentially exposed our entire company to fraud. "What do you need from me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I need you back on the hiring panel. I need your thoroughness." The word came out differently this time, heavy with newfound respect and desperation. "We're terminating Brooks immediately, but we need to make sure this never happens again." I leaned back in my chair, studying Nathan's face. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the kind of humility that only comes from spectacular failure. This was my moment of vindication, the chance to say "I told you so" in 1,000 different ways. Instead, I said, "I'll need full authority to restructure the hiring process. No more shortcuts, no more rapid response teams. We do this right, or we don't do it at all. He nodded frantically. Whatever you need. Whatever it takes. I'll also need a formal apology to the engineering team. They need to know that experience and methodology matter, not just speed. Done. And Nathan? I stood up, straightening my blazer. Next time you want to revolutionize something, maybe ask the person who's been doing it successfully for 7 years what they think first. The cleanup took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of damage control, legal consultations, and rebuilding trust with clients who'd been notified about the potential security breach. Michael Brooks was terminated and escorted out by security, but not before our IT team discovered he'd already attempted to copy several proprietary algorithms. The aftermath was devastating. 3 major clients terminated their contracts immediately, citing security concerns. Our stock price plummeted by 15% in the first week alone. The board called an emergency meeting, and Nathan found himself on the defensive, trying to explain how a convicted fraudster had been given access to the company's most sensitive information. But the financial damage was only part of the story. The real cost was in shattered confidence, both internal and external. Our engineering team, many of whom I'd personally hired and mentored, felt betrayed by the leadership's reckless decision-making. Several of our best developers started updating their resumes, wondering if they wanted to work for a company that prioritized speed over security. I found myself in the strange position of being both vindicated and heartbroken. I'd been right about the importance of thorough vetting, but I took no pleasure in watching my company suffer for Nathan's mistakes. The engineering team welcomed me back with quiet satisfaction. They'd watched the rapid response experiment with skepticism, and my return validated their faith in careful, methodical processes. Jake Morrison was reassigned to standard HR duties, looking relieved to escape the pressure of making snap decisions about technical talent. Emma Thompson went back to finance, where her number-crunching skills were better suited to budget analysis than human evaluation. Both seemed grateful to return to their areas of expertise. Within a month, we were back to our old hiring rhythm. 7 to 10 days per candidate, comprehensive background checks, multiple interviews, and careful cultural fit assessments. Nathan never complained about the timeline again. In fact, he rarely spoke about hiring at all, leaving those decisions entirely to me while he focused on damage control and investor relations. The first candidate I hired under the restored process was Elena Rodriguez, a senior developer with 8 years of experience and impeccable references. Her background check revealed no red flags, her technical skills were exceptional, and her cultural fit was perfect for our collaborative environment. The entire process took 12 days from application to offer, and she's now one of our most valued team members, leading our cybersecurity initiatives, a role that felt particularly meaningful given our recent breach. 6 months later, I received a LinkedIn message from a former colleague at another company. "Alice, I heard about what happened at Apex Innovations. I'm dealing with pressure to speed up our hiring process. Any advice?" I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Experience isn't just about years on the job. It's about learning from mistakes, both your own and others. Sometimes the old way isn't outdated. Sometimes it's just proven. The truth is, there's no substitute for doing things right. In our rush to innovate and optimize, we sometimes forget that some processes exist for good reasons." My methodical approach to hiring wasn't just thoroughness for its own sake, it was a shield protecting our company from exactly the kind of disaster that Nathan's shortcuts created. Now, whenever someone suggests we need to move faster, I tell them the story of Michael Brooks and the 2-week experiment that nearly destroyed our reputation. Because sometimes, the most revolutionary thing you can do is stick to what works. Speed is impressive. Accuracy is essential. And in the end, taking the time to do something right is always faster than having to fix it later.